down. Now in the room is how we get the states. So you see here this state property, we expand that. There's our name, and it should be T state. Welcome back to Arcade. I am Super Tommy, and in this video we're going to continue our multiplayer game series using Phaser and Colyseus. Now, our previous series was getting way too complicated to properly explain or even focus on the multiplayer parts of game development versus just developing the Ludo board game, which had a lot more logic and a lot of moving pieces. So we're doing this series again, we're rebooting it, and we're going to do Tic-Tac-Toe, which is a very simple game where we're going to be able to better communicate the multiplayer parts that you need to worry about when making a multiplayer game. Since some of you will probably use this tutorial to make a different multiplayer game altogether, the specific specifics for Ludo or Sorry or that specific board game is not that important, and it was just adding a lot of complexity that we didn't need. So instead, we're going to do this series, we're going to do Tic-Tac-Toe, and we're going to use Colyseus and Phaser 3.50, but we're not going to use too many Phaser 3.50 features. This is mostly about handling multiplayer game communication using Colyseus. Now, I've already set up our project here, so we've got our backend server index file here, and so this is what we've done. We've had our source folder. This is from the Phaser 3 parcel template from the Arcade GitHub, so github.com/arcade. You can find that Phaser 3 parcel TypeScript template there. That's what we're using here. We've modified it to put all the client code, or the Phaser part, into this client folder. So this may look familiar, right? The scenes, the hello world scene, the index file, and the main file. And then all the Colyseus files we're going to put in the server folder right here. Now, we did a more in-depth video on how to set up the project like this a few weeks ago called Multiplayer Game Server Project Setup. Now that is the same. It's TypeScript, it's Phaser, and it's Colyseus. And then we set it up the exact same way that we have here. So check out that video to see how to set that project up. That includes installing the various NPM packages and going over how to reorganize your project and update your package JSON to run your Phaser game as, npm run start that we use here, and then for the server npm run server start to run the server, so you can have both on your computer while you're developing your game. So let me close that one. So now we have just the basic demo running. So this is just npm run start, which is our parcel dev server serving our client here, which is all this code. And then separately, I have in my terminal, I've run the Colyseus server. So that's launched at localhost 2567. So this is the Colyseus monitor for us to see that our server is running, and then we'll see some information about rooms when we connect to them. So let's start by first setting up some of our front end, or our client. Now, we don't need this hello world scene, so let's just delete it. And let's make a new bootstrap scene. So the idea or the plan we have here for this project is we're going to make a bootstrap scene. It's going to handle some of the logic for switching between different scenes, and also injecting services into scenes that need it. Now, that may sound complicated and whatnot, but it's very simple, or it's fairly simple. So we're going to have a server service in this project, which is going to handle the code for using the Colyseus JS SDK. That's, we can connect to a Colyseus server and then listen for messages coming down from the server, changes coming down from the server, and sending messages to the server if we've done something like select or put an X down or put an O down on the board. So we're going to do a server service, and then we're going to pass those into our game scene when we need it, when we launch our game scene. So we're going to do that through a bootstrap scene. So this bootstrap scene is going to exist through the life of our app here. So once you launch your game, bootstrap is created, then it's going to do some stuff, and then it's going to launch our game scene in parallel with the bootstrap scene. So let's start here. So import Phaser from Phaser. This is pretty standard that we've done in many other videos. We're just making a new scene class called Bootstrap. Now we haven't used Bootstrap previously. We've used preloader scenes, but it's a similar idea. So phaser.scene here. Let's just collapse that. So of course every scene needs an ID or key. We're going to call this Bootstrap. And then we'll have a create here. Let's just do a console.log Bootstrap scene so that we can see it in our console down here. Let's go to let's go to main. So now we deleted this file, so we don't have that anymore. But we replaced it with Bootstrap. So let's call this Bootstrap. Let's come down here, Bootstrap, to launch our Bootstrap scene. So this should refresh. And you see this console.log here. It's the Bootstrap scene that was created and create was called. So that's all good. Next, let's create a game scene. So we're going to want to launch a game scene by this Bootstrap scene. Import Phaser from Phaser. Now it's basically what we just did. Export default class game. Extends Phaser.scene. And just like before, we want to give our scene a key or an ID. And let's just put a create here. Game scene. And we're going to want to launch this from our Bootstrap scene. So in Bootstrap, we want to do this.scene.launch. So launch here you see in this documentation here, there's these comments from the code to tell us what this function does. It's going to run the scene in parallel. So launch game. Now this key is the same as what we specified in this constructor here, right here. Okay. Now we need to make sure we add game to our scene list here. So import game from scenes game. All right, so Bootstrap scene create. Then from the Bootstrap scene we launch the game scene, and there we go. Game scene create is called. All right, great. That's all working. We only see a black screen. We know something is happening. So next here, let's create our server service. So let's go up to the client folder. We want to make a new folder. Let's call it services. And we're going to make a new file here called server. So this is going to handle communicating with our Colyseus server using the Colyseus JS SDK. Import from. Now we want Colyseus.js. Now we went over installing all these NPM packages in this video, multiplayer game server project setup. So do go check that out if this is confusing or your project doesn't have some of the stuff. We go over all of that in that video. No, we don't need to do this big. Let's go over here. All right, so we are going to want the client. We're going to connect to our server. Now let's just make a class here, server, that extends nothing, just say plain class. So in our constructor, we're going to create a new client. So private client is going to be of type client, this Colyseus client. And do this dot client, new client, and now we're going to need to give it an endpoint, which is the URL to the socket server. So it is localhost 2567. But now instead of HTTP, I think if we show it here, no. But this is HTTP since we're using a browser here that's HTTP, but we're doing a WebSocket connection, so it's actually going to be WS / localhost, and it was 2567, I think. Yep, 2567. So now let's just log the client, or this .client, to know that we created it. There's a valid instance there. And then once we have a client, we're going to want to join a room. So let's just sync here, join. And so with Colyseus, you can make different rooms. we're going to make just one room called Tic-Tac-Toe, and then we're going to join that room, and we're going to let Colyseus's matchmaking handle routing players into different rooms. So you may want some different settings for that depending on your game, but we're going to keep it simple here and just let Colyseus handle the matchmaking for us. So this.client.join or create, right? You can join by ID if you happen to know what room ID you have. So let's say you want a function where someone creates a room and then wants their friends to join, they can, you can create a link that you can then let them send out to their friends and they'll join that specific room, opposed to allowing Colyseus's matchmaking to put them into a room that needs people. We're going to do join or create for simplicity here. Now, room name. We're going to have to create this room name or define it on the server, but what we're going to do is call it Tic-Tac-Toe. And then we'll have no option. We can just leave that alone for now. And this returns a promise. So let's await it. And then can give us a room. And then we'll just log out this room so that we can see it, that there is an instance and that things are working. Now, we need to actually go to the server here and then create our Tic-Tac-Toe room. So in Colyseus, let's go to the docs here. Let's go back. So we want the server API. We want to make a room like this. And then we want to register it here in the index file of the server. But first, let's make a new file called Tic-Tac-Toe. And this is going to be the room. So import from, now we want Colyseus, not Colyseus.js, and it's going to be room. So our default class, I'm going to call this room Tic-Tac-Toe, extends room, and then there's no constructor on create. This will be the hook that gets called once a room is first created. I'll just do a log here. You can't see it because I'm running my terminal on a separate screen here, but so that just to make sure things are happening correctly, just do create. Okay, good. So now we have this room. Now let's go back to index, the server index, and here for registering handlers, we want to do gameserver.define. Now this is the name. This is the same name that we're using to join this room, and we called it Tic-Tac-Toe. And it's going to use the Tic-Tac-Toe class that we just made. So now VS Code did an auto import here. And we have that. Good. Save that. That looks good. Let's check the server. That looks good. Okay. Game bootstrap. So let's go here. Let's reload this. All right. We didn't create a server instance or call join yet. Okay, so we can delete these logs. So in our bootstrap, let's add a server class property. And it's going to be this, our server right here. Now we're using this exclamation mark to basically tell TypeScript that we will set this to something. So even though we're not doing in the constructor, it will not be null when we use it. Null or undefined. And then in init, so each time the scene is init, and bootstrap should only be init once, we're going to create the server, new server. And then we're going to pass it to game and let game call join. So in every scene in Phaser, you can always pass this data object when you start a scene, launch a scene, run a scene. There's this data object you can pass, which is arbitrary data. That you can pass from scene to scene, and we're just going to pass our server instance from the bootstrap scene to the game scene. And of course, you see here, this is just new server being called. That's our client. And then in game here, we pass the server. So in create, we can get that by looking at the first parameter of create, which is optional, right? If you don't pass anything, it'll just be undefined. But we're passing in the server, so that, and up here we actually only need type. We're only using this as for typing purposes. We don't actually need this class included in our game scene here. So let's do server data, then console.log. So I'm going to do server.join, and that's it. And then we should log out the room. Let's just see how that goes. Boom. And there is the room. So now all our setup is basically working as the name of the room. That's the name that we defined, right? Here's the room instance. And in fact, if we go to another tab here and connect to localhost 8000, we'll see that we can get the same stuff. But first, go to the monitor here. You see that a new room is made, a tic-tac-toe room. That's the ID of the room. If you wanted to join by ID, there's one person connected, which is our tab over here. Now let's go here and we connect to localhost 8000 again. And we'll go back to the monitor. Now there's two people connected, right? So that's correct. The matchmaking worked. We had one room, only had one person in it. So then it connected us to that room. There's two clients, each one has a different ID. There's state here, so there's nothing in here right now. So we'll have to create a state since our tic-tac-toe game, of course, has state. At the very least, we want to know whose turn it is, like which player, and the board, which in our case, in tic-tac-toe's case, is a 3x3 grid, where it could have nothing in it. It could have an X or it could have an O. So this monitor is very useful just to inspect your game, do the state of your game at runtime, see who's connected, what the state looks like. This is a fantastic tool. And we go over setting that up in that YouTube video for multiplayer game project setup. So definitely check out that video. Okay, so let's make a basic state here so that we can see that in action. So in our server folder here, we have our tic-tac-toe room. Let's make a new folder called tic-tac-toe state.ts, and then we want to import schema from Colyseus. Actually, it's at Colyseus schema, and so schema. Now schema, I just go to the docs here, is the Colyseus state handling API here. Just extend this state handling. So what it's going to do is basically serialize your state and send it to each client. And then when things change, it's going to send only the changes to each client. So it's more efficient than sending the entire state object down to each connected client. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to use the Colyseus schema here to create our basic tic-tac-toe state. Or right now, we're actually just going to make a state that has one property, which is the name, so we can see it come down and inspect it and see that there is in fact data in there. So export default class. We're going to call this tic-tac-toe state. Extend schema. And let's just give it a name. Just call this TTT state, right? So that at least it's different than the text we've been using. And to specify that this should be serialized, there's this type decorator. Put this type decorator here. And to do this, so add type and then give it the type, which is a string. Cool. This is just a basic state setup here. Go to tic-tac-toe room. So in this room here, you see there's a state generic type. So we can specify what that type should be. Right now, it's defaults to any right here, but we know that it's actually going to be tic-tac-toe state. Let's just do that. Now it's auto imported here. And then what we want to do is do this dot set state, actually give it a new instance of our tic-tac-toe state. So new tic-tac-toe state. Okay. Now, if we refresh here, okay, the rooms come down. Now, in the room is how we get the states. So you see here, the state property, we expand that. There's our name, and it should be T state. So there it is. Now, to show you that if another person connects, they'll get the same state. console. Just refresh. That's the room. And of course, here is the state. Right there. So that is the basics of creating the state here. Now, that's all for this part. This is the basic setup. Just to recap here, we started with just the basic project setup. Then we created a bootstrap scene. Now that scene is going to handle switching scenes for us later and creating any instances of services we're going to need, and then send those services into the scenes that need them. As we did here in create, once we launched our game scene, we're injecting the server service into the game, and then the game takes it and then calls join when it needs to join a game. In our server service here is where we're going to put all our logic for communicating with the Colyseus SDK to join rooms and then listen for messages, send messages to the server so they can be broadcast to everyone else that's connected, and all that stuff. And then on the back end here, where the Colyseus server is, we created a Tic-Tac-Toe room, and we need to define a room for each room type that we want. So we want to join a different game, let's say. Let's say you're doing Battleship and Tic-Tac-Toe, you can have 2 of those rooms. And then each room needs a state, and so we created this Tic-Tac-Toe state. Right now, it's just one property, name of type string, but we will want to at least have the board state, which is the 3x3 grid of either nothing, an X or an O, and which player's turn it is, so that the front end, the phaser part, the client, can know to allow someone to make a move or not. And we'll double check that on the back end as well, but we'll do that later. So come back for part 2, where we're going to create a more specific Tic-Tac-Toe game state here, and then handle drawing that state in the Phaser 3 client. Now, if you enjoyed this video, be sure to hit like and subscribe for more videos on making games with Phaser 3.50 and Colyseus.